Hello and welcome to LFC Focus. It is pre-match build-up showtime with the Champions League back, and that of course means that the champions of Europe, our beloved Liverpool, are back in action to defend their crown on the European stage. And we are kicking things off with the group stage, of course, as always, and it is with probably what is going to be the toughest game of our group campaign. You know, we've obviously got to play all three teams home and away, and you'd say that Napoli are by far and away the most difficult team to play against out of the others. You know, Genk and Salzburg, they're probably good, but they're certainly not Napoli. We've played them already. We played them last season. We played them in pre-season as well. We know what Napoli have got to offer, and they obviously do always put up a fight in the Italian title race as well. And being away from home, we know that it's a tough ground to go to. It's probably one of the most difficult places to go to in Europe, certainly from a fan perspective. I've never been, but just looking at the amount of stuff that the club has to put out in terms of guidelines of what to do and what not to do when you're on an away day in Napoli, to be honest, it looks like it's almost not worth bothering to go, because it certainly looks like you don't get the full European away experience. For anyone who is going to the match and for whatever reason hasn't seen it, then please do, because there's a hell of a lot of things you don't want to be doing by the sounds of it. There's all sorts of stuff about not leaving certain areas of the city when you're eating or drinking, always doing it within the hotel that you're staying in, never travelling around in club colours, never going out on your own or anything like that, watching out for, you know, your pockets being picked. And then you've got the whole bit where we're going to the stadium, the fans have got to meet at a coach point away from the ground, and then they all get transported together to basically right to the front door so they can go in without being, you know, caught up in any sort of scuffle with Napoli fans or anything like that. It's just, it seems like a lot of effort just for a football match, and you really feel like the Italian FA, who have been in the news a lot recently for not being very good at anything. You know, there's the whole racism round with Romelu Lukaku as well. It just feels like something really needs to be done, because fan culture in Italy, it's obviously, it's got its reputation and there are certain great things about it, the passion, the fans and everything, but it's clear that there are a lot of things that need sorting out as well. That was a slight rambly way to start the video, but it's a bit disappointing when you think about, you know, all the people. There are probably people who are going for like one of their first ever European aways to this match, and it is probably going to be slightly spoiled, so that is a shame. But putting all the fan stuff aside, it is also an incredibly difficult place to go. As we know, Liverpool went there in the group stage last season and came away having lost 1-0 and having put in a really poor performance. I think it's fair to say it was at a slightly weird point in the season where Mo Salah hadn't quite found his rhythm yet, certainly not in the way that he started this campaign, and there was all that kind of talk of whether or not he was a one-season wonder. The attack wasn't quite working. You had all that rubbish about the attack apparently dying with Zelko Buvac coming out, and, you know, it was kind of a perfect storm. The game came at the wrong time, really, and I think if it had come in the knockout stage in the second half of the season, it would have been a totally different story. But this does therefore represent a chance to prove that the problems of last season are behind us. And I also think, I say problems of last season like it was awful. I'm saying one of the few things that didn't go absolutely perfectly last season, to prove that we've now overcome that difficulty as well. We did kind of prove it by becoming champions of Europe, but you do feel like Liverpool are a side that definitely do come alive in the knockout stages. Our last two Champions League group campaigns have been a little bit tighter than we would have hoped. Obviously, last season we scraped through on, I think it was goals scored. So I think it is important to try and get this group wrapped up as early as possible, and the favourable draw that we got is certainly going to help us with that. So I'm kind of glad we're getting the most difficult match out the way early on, because I think really a point would probably be a solid result in this. Jurgen Klopp was asked about it in his press conference, and he basically said, you know, there's no real way to play for a point, but he said, we'll wait and see after the match, and if I feel like if we can win it, we should win it. So, you know, if we're out and we're playing badly and things aren't quite going our way and Napoli are doing really, really well, then maybe he sets up to try and just see things out for a point and, you know, not sustain any ridiculous injuries or lose the game, which would obviously affect morale and stuff like that. But I think the plan, really, being the champions of Europe, should be to go into this game trying to come away with all 3 points. So team news going into the game, there's been a little bit of, you know, injury news coming out of Liverpool recently. Origi obviously is going to be out with an ankle injury for the foreseeable future after he sustained it against Newcastle on Saturday. I think he hasn't had a scan on it yet or anything, so they haven't really put a time scale down, but obviously he's going to miss out. He isn't part of the travelling squad. Instead, Ryan Brewster has been made part pardon me, of the 20-man squad, which is quite exciting. I mean, I doubt that he's really going to play any sort of part, but obviously now that we can have, I think, what is it, 12-man benches in every single Champions League game, he will have the opportunity to do so. And who knows, if Liverpool are 4-0 up with 10 minutes to go or something like that, maybe Klopp does think about throwing Ryan Brewster out for a little bit, because obviously I think he's probably going to get some kind of minutes in the game against MK Dons in a week's time. So any little extra sharpness that can help him go into that game, you know, and go flying out of the traps would be fantastic. So Brewster's in the 20-man squad. Origi isn't. Robertson also missed training today, but he's still in the travelling squad. So hopefully he's going to be all right. It's been said on the club website that they're going to wait and see what happens with his fitness there. They haven't really said for sure whether or not he is going to play. Yasser Larouci, who obviously deputised a lot at left back over the pre-season campaign, has not been made part of the travelling squad, so we certainly won't be seeing him. I think he is one that we'll probably end up seeing against MK Dons in a week's time. But yeah, Robertson is going to be subject to a late fitness test, so that is something we'll probably not really know, you know, absolutely whether or not he's going to play until a few hours before the game. Apart from that, still obviously no Alisson. We have no idea when he's going to come back, but apparently it is somewhere around the next international break. And also still no Naby Keita as well. So as for the players that I think are actually going to start for Liverpool tomorrow night, I think in goal, it's going to be Adrian. It's obviously going to be Adrian. It's going to be an interesting one as well, because this is his first ever Champions League game at the age of, what, 32, 33, something like that. He's certainly come a long way in his career without ever playing in Europe's Premier Club competition. He has, however, of course, played in a Super Cup final and pretty much won the game for Liverpool. So hopefully he can still be riding that high a little bit. But it is going to be fascinating to see how he gets on in this game, because I feel this is the first time he's going to come under some real pressure. Obviously, in an ideal world, Liverpool boss this game. Napoli never really get into it. He doesn't have anything to do. But as we saw last season when we played them at the San Paolo, they are a fantastic team at home, and it's very difficult for teams to come to that stadium and completely shut Napoli down. PSG also went there and were only capable of getting away with a draw. So he's probably going to come under some sort of pressure. More pressure than I think he came up under against Arsenal. Obviously, they played quite well, created chances at time, but it was also a home match, and I feel like he always kind of had the cushion of the defence in front of him is good enough, and if he lets one goal in, the attack is going to be good enough to score a few more. But I think if Liverpool do win this game, they probably win it like 2-1 or 1-0 or something like that. So we're going to need Adrian to probably come up with some big saves at some point to keep us in the match. So all eyes are going to be on him, of course, but thankfully, obviously, with the extra training that he did receive over the international break, I think some of that showed against Newcastle as well. The way he was passing the ball out from the back, the way the players were passing it back to him as well. They seem to be trusting him a little bit more in tight situations than maybe they would have done in the first few games of the season. So hopefully that starts to become an asset for us again. Ahead of him in defence, I think you keep things simple here. You go with Virgil van Dijk and you go with Joel Matip. I think at right back, there's obviously going to be the Joe Gomez shout, because away from home, you're sort of thinking maybe you want a slightly tighter defence. But I also think, champions of Europe, should we not really be trying to be the team that dominates the match? And also, you put Gomez in and you take Trent out, and suddenly you're causing problems for your front line there. You're causing a situation where Mo Salah is going to either have to be dragged out wide, or we're going to leave a bit of a hole on that right wing, and therefore then the defenders are going to be able to tuck inside and put more pressure on Mo Salah and Roberto Firmino and Sadio Mane in turn. So I think you try and play your best team and you play your best style regardless of who you're coming up against, because like I said, if you're champions of Europe, you should be looking to dominate every single game. So I think Trent still plays at right back, and then I think at left back, I reckon it's probably advisable to make the change, even if Andrew Robertson is available to play the game, because he hasn't trained today. So there's going to be a little bit of an interruption there. When I first heard he hadn't trained and we didn't know anything about any potential injury, I just thought that it was all about fitness, and it was just simply a matter of, you know, as our only real recognised left back, he plays pretty much every single game. So occasionally I feel like he's probably going to end up having to have days off. That's initially why I thought he'd miss training, but now we know it's because of a potential injury. I think it just makes sense to not risk him and to play. I think James Milner is probably the obvious option there. I think as a result, that's part of my thinking behind putting Trent in, because I think if you play Milner at left back, you don't want to sacrifice both of those full-back positions. So I think you have to play Trent, and then Milner should come in for Andrew Robertson at left back, because, you know, at the end of the day, it's probably always good for Andrew Robertson to have a rest as it is. So then moving on to the midfield, I think Fabinho, he has to play at the base. It's a difficult one really, because he did play I think he played the full 90 minutes against Newcastle, I don't think I don't think he was on international. Sorry, I should have got my facts straight before the video. But he doesn't really play that many games for the Brazil national team, so he's probably in a much better condition than Roberto Firmino was coming back from the international break. But I do think still he plays a hell of a lot of games, so whenever we have the opportunity, we should try and rest him. And I think, again, if we are in control, and that's obviously a big if, then he probably comes off and Gini Wijnaldum or Henderson moves into that number 6 role. Speaking of Wijnaldum and Henderson, I think they are going to be the two other midfielders. Initially, I thought it would probably be Henderson, Fabinho, Milner, because I thought Jurgen Klopp might want to just do a little bit of rotation. And we've seen sometimes he does prefer Milner over Wijnaldum in the midfield, just for the sake of, I think, an added bit of security. And also, Milner seems to add a little bit more dynamism going down that left-hand side as well. He's got great link-up play with Andrew Robertson. But I think with Milner now probably playing left-back and Robbo being taken out of the side, I think you then have to put Gini Wijnaldum back in. However, if Robertson does play, don't be surprised if James Milner plays ahead of Gini Wijnaldum. So that is the midfield. And then the attack, of course, it's Salah, it's Firmino, it's Mane. I almost don't need to say that at this stage, but obviously with the fixtures coming thick and fast, there is a bit of room for rotation there, and I think it's a little bit annoying that we then have the game against Chelsea at the weekend, because I think in an ideal world, we'd rotate in at least one of these games. In an ideal world, we're either playing like Sheffield United at the weekend, or we're playing Genk in midweek, and we can just mess our lineup around a little bit just to try and, you know, give a few more players a rest. But I think as it is, we're going to have to go hard in these few games and then give everyone the rest in a week's time against MK Dons. So all of the front three will have to start. So taking a little look at Napoli then, they've started their season in Serie A reasonably solidly, albeit with a bit of a shaky back line. They started off with a 4-3 win against, I think it was Sampdoria. It was some sort of mid-table team. They then followed that up with a 4-3 loss against Juventus, where they came back from 3 goals down, only for Koulibaly to slice it into his own net in like the last minute of the game in stoppage time. And then they came back after the international break and had a bit of a calmer game with a 2-0 win in their most recent outing, I believe. I believe it was at home as well, so that's obviously done them a few favours. But by the looks of it, they're scoring goals, but they're conceding quite a few as well. That sounds like an obvious thing to say, but it doesn't really strike you as the Napoli we saw last season. Obviously in the Champions League, we struggled to really get past their defence. Certainly away from home, we couldn't really conjure up anything to get past them at the Stadio San Paolo. At Anfield, it was a slightly different story. I feel like 1-0 flattered their defence a little bit. We probably should have scored a fair few more goals. I think Sadio Mane skied a couple chances late on in the game where he could have made it 2-0 and given us a little bit of an extra cushion. But as it stands, it looks like they're looking a little bit more shaky than usual. There's also a slightly weird story that's come out about potential unrest around their star player, Lorenzo Insigne, who I think is going to be very, very effective for them in this game. He's the one who scored the winner against us at the San Paolo last season, and you know, pretty much everything in their attacks goes through him. But there was a story about him changing agents to Mino Raiola, and this being a potential signal that he might be looking for a move away from the club. He said it's nothing to do with that, and he's perfectly happy at Napoli. I can kind of see both sides of the situation, because I think if you're bringing in a new agent, especially Mino Raiola, you're not paying him just to, you know, secure a slightly better contract for you next time out. Normally when players want an agent like Mino Raiola in, a super agent who is going to cost a lot of money, they're doing it because they want to force a little bit of a move. We've seen it with players like Paul Pogba at Manchester United as well. We've seen it at Ibrahimovic, who seems to move around every single summer or every single couple of summers and always seems to get a wage packet of around 300k a week, no matter how old he's getting. But I'll be honest, I don't think it's going to have a huge effect on the game. I think it is just, you know, people clutching at straws and looking for some way that hopefully Napoli's star player will be a little bit unsettled. While I do think there's maybe some signs there that he could be looking to leave the club, I don't think it's going to influence how he or anyone else plays in the game on Tuesday night. And obviously, like I said, Lorenzo Insigne is their best player. We did lose to Napoli 3-0 in pre-season, so maybe you're expecting me to talk a little bit about that. But if I'm being perfectly honest, shouldn't really read too much into pre-season results, especially in terms of analysing the other team, because, I mean, you only have to look back to last pre-season where we beat Napoli 5-0 and then we're only able to put 1 goal past them over the course of 3 hours worth of football in competitive matches in the Champions League to realise that pre-season and competitive games don't really correlate whatsoever. And if you need another example, you can only look at the difference between Liverpool's pre-season this summer and the way we've gone about our business in competitive games after that to realise they don't really have a huge bearing. But looking back on the game, it was obviously interesting to see how, once again, like I said, pretty much everything went through Lorenzo Insigne. He had a hand in, I believe, all of the goals. I think he scores 2, and he pretty kind of sets up the other one. It bounces off the post and comes back to someone else who puts it in the back of the net. So he is going to be very, very important to their hit to Napoli, and keeping him quiet is going to be very, very important for Liverpool. I think it's probably good that they, well, I was going to say they only really have one star player. I don't know a huge amount about Napoli, if I'm being perfectly honest, because I don't watch any Serie A, because it's not on the telly, if I'm being perfectly honest. But he is obviously the star man. He's the one we've got to look to neutralise, and that's kind of why I think we should start with Fabinho. But pardon me, because I think we just need to basically put a player on Lorenzo Insigne for most of the match, and that's the kind of thing I think it worked a little bit with Lionel Messi, where we essentially, you say to your most deep line midfielder, you're going to have to watch out for him and help out the defence here, especially obviously with the bombing fullbacks that we have in our system. And that's kind of the main reason that I do want to play Fabinho. I did also consider maybe moving Henderson or Gini back to the 6 and doing a little bit of jiggery pokery there, and maybe moving Ox in. And like I said, if things are going well with half an hour left, then I can totally see why we'd want to do that. But because it's away from home, because it's against a side as high quality as Napoli, and they are probably the best other team in the group aside from Liverpool, I think we have just got to go with our best 11, bite the bullet a little bit, and look forward to when we can rest a little bit later on in the competition. So it is going to be incredibly tough. Like I said, Napoli are a good side. They've started the season reasonably solidly, albeit a little bit shaky defensively. I do still think that Liverpool are probably going to win it, but if you did offer me a point, I'd probably still take that. If you offered me a point and, you know, no player gets injured, no player gets exhausted, nothing horrible happens or anything like that, and it still feels like we'll be able to get a decent result against them at Anfield later on in the campaign, then I'd absolutely take that. Because unlike in the league, where it feels like we have to win every single game, the Champions League is one where there are so few games that I think a point here or there isn't actually necessarily a bad result, because at the end of the day, qualifying is the most important thing. And if you put Napoli aside, to qualify, we essentially only need to be better than Genk and Salzburg, and no offence to those guys, but they are not as good as the European champions. So yeah, that is all for today's video. Thank you guys very, very much for watching. If you did enjoy the video, as always, you know what to do. Hit the like button down there, hit the subscribe button there if you're new around here. Check out some of the other videos that have been out on the channel over the past few days. Don't forget to follow at LFC Focus TV on Twitter, and I'll be back tomorrow night after we've hopefully, fingers crossed, beaten Napoli and are top of our Champions League group. Until then, bye for now.